Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education by Kate Colbert and Joe Salustio with contributions by Elvin Freites is now available for pre-order on Amazon. Get your Kindle edition or your softbound book. It's going to be
amazing.
Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. This is Elvin Freites, co-founder of the EdUp Experience, and I'm here today with a special episode. You guys know I'm in the background most of the time. I'm not usually on the mic. I was a long time ago, so I'm a little rusty, but I'm back on the microphone because this is one special for me. I am very curious about our guest coming up and what he has to talk about, some new initiatives going on and where he works and his thoughts on higher education. So I'm going to bring him in real quick. I don't have sound effects, unfortunately. Joe has the master key sound effects machine. So I'm just going to be straightforward and get ready to go. So here we go. His name is Ian Wilhelm, and he is assistant managing editor at a place you may have heard of, the Chronicle of Higher Education. How you doing, Ian?
I'm good, Elvin. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. Thanks for being on. I appreciate it. So let's get right into it. So in case someone in higher ed does not know, which it would be very hard to find someone that does not know the Chronicle of Higher Education, can you tell us a little bit about what you do there, what the organization is all about, and maybe the history and where you're going forward?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And yes, occasionally you do find someone who may not have heard of us, but yeah, we've been around for over 50 years. We celebrated our 50th anniversary just a couple years ago. And, primarily starting off as really the only only newspaper that was covering all of higher education many, many years ago. Started off as a nonprofit, changed over to for-profit. We certainly, our bread and butter for many years was a print edition, which we still produce bi-weekly. We still have a lot of readers who still want to have that print edition in their office, in the provost's office, in the president's office, which is still great. But certainly we're at Chronicle.com, and that's where we're mostly focusing our energies for many weeks. And certainly, as I do, doing more stuff virtually, doing more stuff online, and doing more virtual events, as many people are doing occasional podcasts. But yeah, what we are essentially is we try to be. This is not the greatest phrase, but what I usually tell people, hey, we're the Wall Street Journal for higher education, without the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. But what we are basically is we're trying to cover higher education from top to bottom in the sense of covering both all the controversies, all the trends, all the issues we think that folks in higher ed need to know about higher ed in order to do their job better. And also, I'd say, grow in their careers too. That's also certainly a central part of how we think. So that includes commentary pieces, opinion pieces, but also daily news articles. Again, getting back to what I probably focus on a little bit more, looking for those trend stories, looking for those pieces that are those conversation things that are going to help folks grow in their job. Big think pieces, but also some stuff that's very specific to their role. So yeah, the Chronicle's been around for a long time, and we sort of, like to think of ourselves as pretty much part of the firmament of higher education. Yeah. For good or for bad sometimes.
Yeah, I got to tell you a quick story that when you talk about the print edition, and I've told Liz McMillan this a couple of times, that when I was way back over 20 years ago, starting my higher ed career, that's one of the first periodicals or newspapers or whatever that I learned about higher education was the Chronicle of Higher Ed, the print edition, that big one. It was like a big one with a whole bunch of pages. And so exactly, it went from like the president's office down to the provost. It just kept going down and down. People would put little sticky notes on it. And hey, you got to check out this article, read this article. And then it'd get down to me, like a lonely higher ed first year person, like, oh, check out this article. And I was doing residence life most of the time. Mm-hmm. So I was looking at residence life articles, and then job search, obviously looking for job opportunities. And then I found it to be like fantastic for professional development. It was great pieces, and then I would highlight some things. And then as I got older, I would be the one passing it down to younger folks. And so I have a great affinity with the Chronicle of Higher Education, and I'm sure you're getting a whole new crowd or a whole new group of people who are doing the same thing, because having that in your hands and just reading it and get it passed down around the office, there's something about it, there's just not the same as the electronic piece. What do you think about that?
I appreciate that. No, many people have asked us, when are we going to go fully digital? And we're going to go fully digital when our audience says, hey, that's what we want primarily. And we do find ourselves pretty evenly split. I don't have the data necessarily. I haven't looked at it recently, but a lot of folks still like to pass it around. We used to have an ad campaign where you saw like a cut up version of the Chronicle because people still were cutting out articles. That's many years ago, but for the most part, you're right. People still like to see it in print. I don't work as much as the print edition as I used to, but I still love that part of the process because it really felt at the end of the week we were producing something that's really in some ways, is getting back not just to what the daily news is, but looking ahead and trying to get people a sense of what's coming up in higher ed as much. So it felt substantive in that way. So I still love the print edition. I still love the ink on my fingers. And I appreciate what you said, Elvin, as it's heartening to hear as a journalist, as someone who came to the Chronicle as a journalist, not someone focused on education, but who has grown to really appreciate the diversity and the richness of covering higher ed. To hear you say that in your own career that you benefit from it, because we certainly hear stories like that, and we want to hear stories like that, but it's always refreshing to hear that because that gives our job meaning, right? To know that it's being read, but also being read and helping people grow in what is really a vital sector, as you know better than I, and frankly, in American society, if not the world. So thank you for that. Yeah, no, the print edition is probably not going away. We did go bi-weekly. I'm just going to acknowledge it. We used to be weekly. We went to bi-weekly because, in part, because people said it was just, it was like my New Yorkers. They keep on stacking up on my bedside. You don't get that. But people still very much reading it, and I think we've done a good job of. We've changed the design in recent years, which I can again sing the praises of because other people did it and made sure they did it. But I still think we're hoping the print edition is still that vital piece of information you're going to, and you may not be able to read it every day. But we also now have daily newsletters, weekly newsletters. So we're trying to be digital forward as well.
No, I love it. And it's funny you mentioned that. Yeah, my thumbs were all dirty from going through each one. I remember that. That's good stuff. So you talked about moving forward. So let's talk about what's coming up. And I'm very, very curious to know, and I'm sure our listeners will. Let's talk about ChronFest. What is ChronFest? How did this idea come about? What's the goal? Go for it, Ian. Let us know.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I like the fact that you're using the terminology that the cool kids are using, the ChronFest, which we actually have a hashtag for it, which my wife will kind of jokingly refer to as hashtag ChronFest whenever I'm talking about work. But yeah, it's the Chronicle Festival. So we really borrowed this idea from, again, the New Yorker, the Atlantic. They have sort of festival of ideas. And we thought, well, gosh, it seems to be missing somewhat in higher ed, a larger conversation both about higher education's place in society, as well as perhaps, as I hope you appreciate, they have a little fun. They have a little bit of moments with the talk, because we are obviously focused on some serious issues. We are talking about some serious challenges within higher ed, especially now. But this was our big push to do something virtually. So we started it last year. So like many places during the pandemic, we embraced virtual, basically Zoom sessions, right? We started doing a lot more Zoom webinars. It was really embraced by our audience because it was giving them information, having some conversations that they wanted, having some back and forth about some vital issues. And we thought the festival would be a big way to do that. And we did it last year. We had 3 days of program, mostly half-day programming. But again, we've learned a lot about doing this, so we're going to continue to step up our game. But so I feel like in many much ways a professor who had to pivot onto an online course, since I'm a print journalist who now does Zoom journalism. But the festival this year, let me stick to that. It's coming up on October 31st and November 1st, half day, starting at 12:30 Eastern time. And we're excited this year because we've got some bigger names from outside of higher ed. So mostly conversations that the Chronicle's involved with is higher ed talking to itself. Those are vital conversations. We certainly love the fact that we can bring together different sectors of higher ed, and that's really part of our job too. But in this case, we're really excited to have some folks who are outside of higher ed who have a deep interest in it talking about it. So I'm referring here to specifically Malcolm Gladwell, the author, the New York Times best-selling author, podcast extraordinaire, public intellectual, you might want to call him. He'll be talking about at ChronFest. So I'm excited about to interview him. But we have a host of other people coming in. Hopefully it will all be great conversations that people can join virtually.
That's fantastic to hear. And I love this idea. And I didn't know it was the second year. That's great. It's good to know. So I really want to dive deep into what's your plan when you're going to talk to Malcolm? What kind of questions? I mean, you can't give everything away. But you want to
I gotta keep something back. Yeah, no, I
back. Why should people attend? I mean, let's kind of give them a little taste of it.
Well, let me say this first, and I'll give you definitely a taste of it. I also, if anybody wants to, hit me up on my LinkedIn page or let me know, what questions you want us to ask Malcolm, because that's one of the things we do. If you register, we're allowing folks to. Or actually not just allowing, we're asking folks to send me questions beforehand, because I do want to know what people really are interested in hearing from him. But in terms of Malcolm, I get to call him Malcolm, I guess, Mr. Gladwell. I mean, he has been pretty opinionated about his views of higher education. He's really talked about how it's an area he has found deep interest in And so people have probably been aware of some of his podcasts. He just put out an audiobook, and just another plug for ChronFest. If you register, you'll get a free copy to download his newest audiobook, which really is a collection of his podcasts from revisionist history. The name of this podcast.
What's the website that people should go to for the ChronFest? I want to make sure they got the right website.
ChronFest something.com. Let me make sure I get it to you.
I love it.
I think actually, here I'll take, go to chronicle.com, look in the top bar. There's a spot right there for it. That's probably the easiest way to find out what you're looking for. But I appreciate that question, Elvin. I should be better on my promotional.
That's great stuff. Don't worry about it. So, but continue. You were saying about.
Oh yeah. So Malcolm, I mean, he's got this audiobook out that just came out. This is part of the reasons he's joining us, right? To be honest, he's plugging this book just like I'm plugging ChronFest. But the name of the book is. Or the series of podcasts really that's been collected into an audiobook is Why I Hate the Ivy League.
Yeah.
So this guy's got opinions. We know he's got opinions. And most of his opinions are very focused on selective elite colleges, which obviously I would say is somewhat of an easy target, somewhat of a fair target. Malcolm comes from, interestingly enough, he's from Canada. His experience of applying to college is drastically different than the American one. And he finds, sort of coming from this outsider perspective, which I do find valuable and refreshing, it's just sort of interesting, almost like a foreign correspondent coming to look at American higher education. And he talks about that, how strange the admissions process is to him, how bizarre the sort of way that most Americans wear their college on their sleeve, in the sense of literally like they have it on their, they have swag, they love their teams and all this stuff that he kind of finds sort of interesting. But also, maybe to this larger point, Malcolm talks about how much talent America leaves on the table. And what he means by that is how many super smart, super resilient, super potential kids with a lot of potential. And I think everyone in higher ed knows this. Don't even get access to higher education. And so those are some things we're going to explore. And I definitely want to talk to him what he thinks is wrong about higher ed, but I definitely want to ask him, hey, what's it doing right? Because I don't want to sit there and just explore the problems over and over again. I also want to try and we'll see how this goes, because it's going to be challenging, hold his feet to the fire a little bit when it comes to, hey, you talk a lot about elite higher education, but there's a whole system here. And other people have pointed this out, not just me, certainly, but there's a whole well-grown system of community colleges. He certainly has explored HBCUs, but in other places. So he's certainly aware of that. But I want to talk a little bit about that, like the underplayed part of higher education that is probably that functions well. It certainly has its other issues, but let's not just focus on the Ivy League as being the place, because I think that too much ink gets spilled, too much podcast focus on that, too much stuff gets picked on like those places, and they're sort of, again, easy to pick on, and they're sort of rarefied air for those places. So that's my hope, is to kind of have a broader conversation about what the system needs to do and to improve, and also given our audience, hey, what would you say to college leaders? What can they do to improve themselves? What can they do to help build public trust in this country? And that's the big part of it too. Public trust in higher education is dropping. People feel like the value of a higher education degree is dropping. What can they do to kind of help supplement that?
Yeah, we talk a lot about that on the pod. Joe talks about value of education. Yeah, exactly. That's my point. I was going to ask you to definitely get his thoughts on that, because I'd be curious. I'm sure a lot of people would too. So obviously, I'd love to know his thoughts on the future of higher ed, which I'm going to ask you at the end later on. So who else is going to be there? Kind of run us through some other folks and some topics that are going to be covered during the ChronFest.
Yeah, I appreciate, Elvin, the opportunity to talk a little bit about that. And I'll talk about probably, I encourage everybody to look at who we've got lined up. We got a couple other university presidents. We've got a couple other people, authors, but I'm really excited, especially on the first day. So Malcolm's talking on November 1st. On the first day, October 31st, just a coincidence, it's Halloween. It's spooky higher ed talk, but we're going to focus that day on what students need. And part of that is, hey, what do they need on campus? Certainly in terms of student support services. I'm sure mental health issues will come up, because that's a big one right now. We'll certainly talk about, hey, how can we better their career outcomes, especially when there's so many alternative providers of education. And certainly, again, back to this question of the value of the bachelor's degree or even an associate's degree, when some places are saying, hey, we don't need that as an employer, we don't need to look for that. But at the end of the day, and maybe this is symbolic in a way, but it's going to be substantive too. I might have one of our reporters is going to be interviewing 2 students. So I'm giving the final say on that first day to 2 students.
Yeah.
Certainly 2 students who are outspoken, we've talked to before, but they kind of, broadly represent, I hope, the chance to talk about, hey, what do students really think? What are they really asking? So again, I like the fact that on this day when we're having some really big speakers, again, some college presidents, the president of Temple University speaking, the president of the University of Washington speaking.
That's great.
But at the end of the day, we're gonna have 2 students who are gonna say, hey, here's what I heard that I find that resonates with me.
Yeah.
So that's something I'm excited particularly about. And then on the second day, there's a couple other conversations. We've got a conversation with some scientists about what it's like to communicate research in a time of misinformation and public distrust. I think that's obviously relevant coming out of the pandemic and what we experienced there. And then we're actually going to have another author, similar to Malcolm, another person who's been critiquing higher ed from the outside, and that's Will Bunch. He's a columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer. He wrote a book about sort of after the Ivy League fall, or excuse me, after the Ivory Tower falls. And he's talking there kind of like what he feels like that higher education has contributed to some of the divisions in this country politically and in our society. But again, similar to that conversation with I'll have with Malcolm, we're going to try and turn that towards like, hey, what can we do about it? Not just talk about what the problems is. And the great thing there, I think, is, and Will, I know, is excited about this, having talked to him, is we're going to put him in a conversation with another college president, and that's Ruth Simmons, the president of Prairie View A&M, an HBCU in Texas, but also the former president of Brown University. So someone who's been at different types of institutions, and knowing Ruth, she's going to push him on some things too, I hope, and say, hey, and critique his critique, because I think she's been on the ground working to build education and democracy in its own way through her different institutions she's been at. So there's some of the things I'm excited by. But again, and we're also going to try and get the audience involved. We're going to have some polls. We're going to have some Q&A. And so we hope to hear from the audience as well about what they want to gain from these conversations too.
Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education, by Kate Colbert and Joe Salustio, with contributions by Elvin Freites, is now available for pre-order on Amazon. Get your Kindle edition or your softbound book. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah, that's great. And it's a great opportunity for them to contact you via LinkedIn. It's Ian, I-A-N, Wilhelm, W-I-L-H-E-M, right?
W-I-L-H-E-L-M. Yeah.
E-L-M, sorry. Got it at LinkedIn. So make sure you hit them up and ask them questions. And so it sounds like you kind of covered why people should attend. So now the question is, after this event, what do you want people to be talking about? What at the water cooler or the virtual water cooler? Oh, I went to the ChronFest and I got this. This is amazing. This is great. What do you want them to take away?
That's a great question. I feel like what I want them to take away is an ability to have taken a step back from their roles. As you well know, like so many folks are focused on whether it's the fire they got to put out that day or that issue they got to deal with that day, whether they're they're a faculty member, whether they're in student affairs, whether they're in the dean's office and some other, just so many different roles, right? And so many different things to focus on. They get a chance to step back and kind of say, okay, this is where higher education is. So I've got a little glimpse of the future, and they keep that conversation going a little bit. I do hope that we are engendering, and we at the Chronicle are thinking more about, very similar to you all have been thinking about, is what role can we play, but how can we deepen our coverage of this loss of public trust in higher ed, and what it takes to reclaim it. It's a very difficult issue because it deals with costs, and student debt is a part of that. It deals with, certainly on the right, it has other implications because there's concerns about the curriculum, right? And so it's very widespread, but we can hear this continually from college presidents about the concern that in their conversations with state legislatures, it has changed dramatically in the last few years. And with the public in general, and some folks seeing, again, families thinking, hey, and students thinking, hey, is this really valuable to us? What is the ultimate value given the cost of it? So I hope there's this broader conversation going on that people will walk away from ChronFest feeling and thinking about, but I hope they don't just feel like, again, that there are these issues that are too hard to overcome, that we've given them a sliver. I'm not saying we're going to give them the solution because that's too much, but there's a sliver of, hey, that's an interesting idea. Let me try that. Let me adapt that to my campus. Or that's a different way of thinking about an issue. Hopefully we can do something about that. within our local community, because you can't solve the national issue. All these issues have to be solved at the community level, I imagine, when it comes to rebuilding the trust between your higher education institution and your local community. You're not going to change the country immediately. It's going to take that one step at a time. So I hope that's something that we can give people and they walk away with, and I hope they will come back to us and say, hey, also, hey, we love this and we didn't love that. I hope we wanted more of X. I'm happy to hear that too, because we're trying to figure this out too in terms of what this festival can be and how it can both celebrate and also help higher education think about itself.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I don't have the sound effects, but if I did, I'd hit the button that says amazing. That's a
I know, exactly. Please add that in so my kids can listen and enjoy the
amazing.
Exactly.
So we love that one. Okay, that's fantastic. So I want to make sure we cover a couple more things before we finish up. So first of all, is the event free? Is it going to be recorded? Can people get access afterward? I mean, how does that all work? The logistics.
Elvin, I do appreciate that. Yeah, I know, and I should mention that this is free. So the Chronicle itself, I'm just going to tell we're a subscriber-only publication. You can get a couple articles for free if you become, if you give us your information. This is the case. We are, the events are free, so anyone can join. I'm just going to be candid with you. We do have some sponsors, so expect to get a marketing email. So it's free in exchange for your information. But at the same time, those sponsors have been very helpful, and they do have some sessions there, which will be not commercials, but talking about the issues.
That's great.
In this case, it's Workday and Adobe, so plug. But it is free, and for anyone to join. And sorry, what was your other question? I got stuck.
It's going to be recorded. Can they access after the fact?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I don't expect necessarily everybody can spend half a day not working, listening to ChronFest. So yeah, no, it's going to be all recorded. So anyone who signs up will get the on-demand version of it, and then when we actually after that, we'll make it more convenient. So it's like one long day of a Zoom session practically. You're not going to want to skip around 3 hours of that. So we do actually edit the video, and so you can go to the specific session you want to watch that session. If you want to just watch, if you're only interested in watching me and Malcolm talk, go to that session, just watch that later on afterwards. Obviously, again, if you register, you'll get all that information. And also, we'll be providing folks with additional resources, not just links to Chronicle articles, links to some things, but one cool thing we're doing this year is we've hired a company that will do live note-taking. And when I say live note-taking, it's actually really like these cool illustrations. I don't want to call it doodling, because that gives it kind of a sense of like you're kind of you're doing something you shouldn't be doing in your class time or something. But it's these cool illustrations about what the conversation is, so you can kind of look back. Then we'll provide this to everybody afterward, but they can look back at it and remember the conversation, have some sort of touch point for these conversations. So it's a nice illustration. It's like I said, it's engaging, but it's one other piece that we're hoping that people will find valuable coming out of the festival.
Well, that sounds super interesting. I'd love to see how that plays out. That's fine. So they're illustrating the conversation live, and then there'll still be part of the on-demand as well. There's going to be that component with all written.
Yeah, let me explain that. So they will be illustrating it live. Actually, there's some versions of this where you can actually have them on camera and you can see them illustrating it live. And we will feature them at some point if we get time. It really depends on how the day goes. But in the past, we've done this. We've talked to the illustrator for a few minutes just to see what they're going to show people. But we will send the PDFs out, so people can actually have they don't have to go to the recording to look at it. No, it will be actually in we'll send it out separately as a PDF. And so they can see from each session, hey, if there's a session they found really engaging, there's some ideas there, but they've kind of forgotten them. Oh, let me look at this, this graphic illustration, this graphic note-taking, and maybe that can help spark their ideas. Maybe they can share it with some colleagues. I certainly hope that, back to your point about what I hope people would walk away from, I would love it if, like you said earlier, where people shared Chronicle articles, if this is something that people, hey, I really had this one conversation, I heard this one person talk about the career services and how it needs to change, for example, and that's really something I'm focused on in my position in my college. I hope I share that, right? The note-taking or the session itself will certainly encourage folks to do that and to share it around, because I think that's where we might get some traction, some new ideas might come up.
Yeah, it sounds like a really badass professional development opportunity. That's what I keep thinking. I would want.
That was the tagline I wanted to go with, but instead we went with the ideas shaping higher ed. I don't think my boss was going to go for badass, but that's,
I mean, I would hope and I would encourage, higher ed leaders to let their team know about this and say, you know what, this is something that's important. You should be attending this. You should get a lot of notes and takeaways, and then let's go back and let's meet together and see what we can do, the information to move forward. So
Elvin, I appreciate that. Just to say that last year we did have someone we found out from an institution that they did that. They had people listen in, and just one institution. I would love it if this became a thing, but they had one institution. I was really excited to hear that, right? Because that's exactly right. They said, well, we all listened in. and we all came back together to talk about what we heard. And,
Yeah.
if we, I wish there was a way the Chronicle had the capacity to kind of help with that,
Yeah.
across the country. But to your point, that would be the ultimate. That's a great goal. And I
Yeah.
realize not everyone can do that given their workloads and things like that.
Yeah.
And everyone's burned out too. But I would hope we because again, we hope that something you can take away, but also hope you can inspire you as well, and you're in the work too. Because I think that would be great. I'm knocking on wood and say I hope that happens again this year.
That's awesome. Amazing. All right.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So let's wrap up real quick. So let's talk last two questions. This has been great, but yeah, I appreciate it. So what have we not covered? We covered a lot, short amount of time, but I felt like we covered a lot. Is there anything that we haven't covered for ChronFest, about the Chronicle in general? What you guys got going on in the future? ChronFest 2023, whatever you want to talk about, anything that we can cover. And the last question I have for you, which I'm very curious to hear, because I know you have a lot of information, inside information, and access to a lot of different people in higher ed, is what do you see as the future of higher education?
Oh, I'll see how long I can delay until I have to answer that big question. In terms of the Chronicle, I really appreciate that question. I mean, outside of ChronFest, I just encourage folks to check out our other virtual. I'm calling them virtual forums. So these are sort of more of our bread and butter. We're doing more of these each week. I'm really again, just like everybody else, I had to make my own sort of pivot to Zoom back when the pandemic started. We're continuing those. We're finding people that people have enjoyed them. We have a good audience for them for the most part. But I do people, can check them out. But again, back to your point, I want this to be a two-way conversation. So if there's things that we're missing in our coverage, if there's a type of virtual event you think we should do, if there's a guest you think we should have, but again, if there's something we should be covering or something we should be covering better, our door is always open. I feel like we've tried to get better at this, not perfect about it, but my LinkedIn is open. Or if there's other ways to get in contact with folks at the Chronicle, you can get me. My email is ian.wilhelm@chronicle.com. Let me know what you want me to talk to Malcolm about, but also let me know again what issues you think we should be covering. I think it's just the more we can hear from our audience, the better. I think that's always the point. I think sometimes the Chronicle can feel like it's a distant thing, but we don't want to be that. We want to make sure we're reflecting what folks are interested in. That's great. And the future of higher education. I'm not gonna let you get away without. I know you trying to dodge it. Well done. I gotta, I have to make sure I'm not expressing my own opinions. Yes, but it is the key question, right? What is it, and what is it after this pandemic? Everyone's talked about the pandemic as this accelerant for online education, for different types of teaching, for certainly changing how campus services may work, especially when engaging with students. We've heard it across the board. And of course, accelerant in terms of thinking more people think about work-life balance. At the flip side, you've got this whole thing where it just means so many people have been burnt out. So how do you, as a campus leader, continue to kind of push changes that you think are really, really important or necessary, and for the life of your institution, at the same time that your staff, your faculty have just faced too much in the last year. So I think that's one of the key things. That's really a near-term challenge for higher education. And going forward, I do think you're going to see a split between those institutions that have been able to use the pandemic as something of an accelerant and increase. And we've seen this reflect in some of our surveys where a bunch of people said it made us more resilient in admissions. And it doesn't necessarily mean their enrollment is up, but they feel like they've had to force conversations about how they do different recruiting, especially given the demographic changes in this country. It forced them to change how to think about online teaching and perhaps embrace it more and as a possible, certainly as a revenue model, but also do more. So you see these places have said, hey, and it really splits along 50%, hey, we've done a great job. We've been able to have more conversations. We're not stuck in our silos as much. And so we're going to move forward with that. So there's a little bit of those, let's call those the haves. They've been able to become more resilient. And you got a 50% saying, hey, it didn't make us resilient. It fractured us. It showed us where the fault lines were, and we're not able to cover them up. And we really feel like we're just stumbling along here in the dark, not able to take advantage of this accelerant that COVID talks. So unfortunately, I don't think that doesn't mean, I'm not sure that convinces me that there are going to be those mass closures that some people have predicted for a while. But I do think you're going to see some more closures. I do think you're going to see a lot more mergers. Frankly, I'd say I'm surprised I haven't seen as more going on. And I think there are probably more talks going on. Certainly, we have no idea, understandably. So I think that's one of the big things. I think you're going to see these sort of dividing lines. I think that's going to be a big part of it. I think part of it obviously is going to be where technology plays the biggest role. the places that embrace technology in a way that makes sense for them and has this so-called digital transformation that people have been talking about for a long time, but seems never to have been here, but now apparently is kind of here. At least the whole campus is talking about it in a different way. And then I can't even venture to talk about the where the societal questions are in terms of where the politics go in higher education. I just think the challenge for college presidents and other folks who feel like they're under the gun from their state legislators, from national folks, and these conversations, how the campus has now become part of the culture wars, just puts a lot of people in. And I do think you're going to have a continued turnover in the president's, in the shorter terms in the president's space. We've heard anecdotally, again, some folks saying, hey, it's just not worth being a public university president these days.
No.
It's too hard. It's too contentious. We saw something that happened at Michigan just this week. Obviously very different. That was an internal debate. I want to be careful here and not paint everything as who brought a brush, but I think that's going to be turnover in the college presidency. I think is going to continue to be a big thing, which leads back to transformation. You may have been able to accelerate, but if you don't have the leadership that sticks around to make sure those changes stick, those institutions won't survive, and they may fall back, fall back farther behind their peers. So I guess I just see sort of challenges ahead, but I don't want to end on that note because I feel like there's some smarter folks than me. If you've ever interviewed Brian Alexander, who's a futurist, who writes about higher education, Brian, talks about several different futures of higher education. I think he's right. It's always not one path, right? It's several different futures, and I do look to him for those big thinking about the future. And there are really some opportunities too in online education as people start to embrace that. I think I'll listen on that note, a note of optimism, so the cynical journalist in me doesn't have to take over and say, and hopefully again that some inspiring things out there. Certainly, when I hear your story about the Chronicle and things like that, that's helpful too.
Yeah. No, it's funny because I'm not sure if you know, but we're writing a book, the commencement, beginning of the new era of higher education, where we interviewed, over 100 college university presidents, and the future is bright. It's extremely bright for higher education. And a lot of the things that you touched upon is actually going to be in the book. So Kate Colbert and Joe Salustio and I'm doing some contributions. They're putting it together, but we're up to like a few chapters now. And it's funny, a lot of things that you mentioned, it's really interesting. A lot of partnering up, leadership, where's the new leadership going to come from, turnover, but it's all bright in the end. And so I appreciate your feedback.
Yeah, I mean, Lane, one thing, I'm excited to see when that book comes out. I definitely want to get a copy. But the other thing is to your point, in these surveys we've asked, hey, we've had time and time again people saying, I'm worried about higher ed. My enrollment is down, my retention is down, but I'm optimistic that my institution is either figuring it out or is figuring it out. And that really, and that struck me as being odd, but of course that's what they feel like, because they're impassioned people, they're and people who are got into this area of work for a reason. And so of course, optimism still runs eternal, and it should, because it's not just all doom and gloom. And so I appreciate that what you said, and I'm curious about what you all are finding there. And we'll switch tables here at some point. Maybe we'll interview you all for the Chronicle.
You're on, Ian. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. So once again, we're going to go to chronicle.com, right? The chronicle.com. Okay, chronicle.com. Ian Wilhelm at LinkedIn, and we'll get you connected and then ask you some questions for Malcolm. And that's going to be October 31st. It starts. It goes until the November 1st, right?
Just 2 days for virtual.
Yeah, virtual, online is free. It's going to be recorded. Just sign up. It sounds like an awesome opportunity to really learn some what's going on in higher ed. So I'm very excited about that. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it, Ian. How has your EdUp experience been so far?
It's great. I'm glad to be now one of the EdUppers. I think I can say that. I'm sorry I didn't get more of the. Next time I come back, I got to promise me some special audio effects.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well done.
It's gonna happen. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for tuning in. We appreciate it, ladies and gentlemen. You just EdUp.
Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education, by Kate Colbert and Joe Salustio with contributions by Elvin Freites, is now available for pre-order on Amazon. Get your Kindle edition or your softbound book. It's going to be
amazing.